Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs, your award-winning fan Tottenham Hotspur podcast. We are back. Busy week here on Last Word on Spurs. To use the word relentless, I tell you what, it is absolutely relentless. We've not even done a signing yet. Imagine what it'll be like when we actually get signings coming through the door. Look, we're all excited. We're all, of course, in the nature of this month. Like I said, we want to buy everyone. We want to sell everyone. We want to loan everyone. There's nothing like a January transfer window. And alongside me, look, it's a man that is always here for the crazy train of a ride. It can only be Mr. Lee McQueen back alongside me. Macca, how are you, my man?
Yeah, all right, mate. You're still getting used to the no beard, Wick, yeah?
I can't take it. You've dropped 20 years. What's going on here?
I know. Craziness. Yeah, look, good to be back with your esteemed Charlie Eccleshare as well. Absolutely loving it. Can't wait to get into it. We've obviously got loads of developments to tell all of our viewers and listeners about. All them 15, 16 different signings that have come in through the door already. Daniel Levy doing business early, not dragging his feet whatsoever on any type of fee, structure or anything. So, it's all change, isn't it? Crazy train, here we come.
Absolutely, mate. Crazy train, here we come. Now, listen, we're always delighted to get this man back on Last Word on Spurs wherever possible. He is a man in demand, very, very busy. If he's not here, he's normally opposite Ange in a good way, I've got to say, normally throwing the questions at the man himself. Look, Spurs correspondent for The Athletic. Not only that, of course, View from the Lane, the Totally Football Show, football cliches. It can only be Charlie Eccleshare back on Last Word on Spurs. Chaz, love to see you back on here. How are you? You well?
I'm good, yeah. Thanks for the nice intro. Yeah. All good.
Listen, mate, always a pleasure to have you on. I know it's a busy time of year, so we always appreciate you giving us a slice of your time. Now, normally I would go straight into transfers. I'm going to upset everybody here now and not do that and ask you very quickly about the draw that's come through for the fourth round of the FA Cup. Now, those that listen and watch Last Word on Spurs on a fairly regular basis know how dear to my heart the FA Cup is. I was nicknamed after Ricky Villa, so there's absolutely no doubt how much this trophy means to me. Man City out of the hat, holders of the competition. We heard you on the View from the Lane, Charlie, trying to talk us up, trying to give us a bit of hope, a bit of optimism on that panel about the fact that Spurs are going to be at home. They're against a City side that have still not beaten Tottenham Hotspur at the stadium, not even scored a goal. And I'll go along the point that I'm sure Guardiola would have been just maybe as upset as us to be drawing Spurs. I'll ask you again, Charlie, for our viewers and listeners on Last Word on Spurs, how do you feel about the draw from a Tottenham perspective with the journalist hat on?
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted that yesterday. I think Pep will be as sort of disappointed about that draw as potentially Spurs are. Yeah, I mean, their record it's just bizarre how bad it is. The fact that, yeah, as you say, they never scored, never got so much as a draw at the stadium. So it should be fun. I mean, I think it will have a different feel to it being an FA Cup game. Ange spoke about that before the Burnley game, about how the FA Cup games do have a slightly different feel. I'm really looking forward to it. And in a way, if Spurs do win, then they're going into the fifth round of the FA Cup with no City, no Arsenal, one of Villa or Chelsea gone. And you're thinking, okay, well, there's an opening there. Or they go out, which obviously would be really disappointing, but then they've got the league to focus on. And I think with lots of players coming back, all of a sudden that, their top four chances or higher might increase. So that's
probably Charlie. Could we?
But yeah, exactly. And then we're back into the could we discussions. So I think it's a fun draw. I think the game's going to be brilliant. Really looking forward to it.
Charlie, there'll be people asking me this question to you, and you can blame me for asking you this. Obviously, Spurs are depleted at the moment in terms of the fact of injuries and those that are away at the African Nations Cup. Obviously, as things stands, we haven't got Yves Bissouma, no Pat Matessar. Of course, Romero, Maddison, as we understand, are still in the process of working their way back. Any hope and optimism that we could see Romero and Maddison make a surprise return for this one?
Don't know. We've got into the habit recently, haven't we, of kind of checking the team news and someone pops up. There was Bentancur was suddenly there. Sessegnon was suddenly there. I do wonder. I mean, I asked Romero, I asked Ange at the last press conference about both Romero and James Maddison, and his answer was the same, that neither of them were training, so he couldn't give a time frame. So yeah, I guess we'll have to see. But I'm sure there are a lot of Spurs fans who are thinking, wow, maybe could this be another kind of Bentancur situation and someone comes back a little bit ahead of schedule? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Amen. Mac, I'd bring you in. I know you've got your own questions to ask, Charlie, but it would be wrong of me to not ask you to give us your hope for this draw? Give us some optimism, Mac. I need to ask Lee McQueen for optimism on Last One on Spurs. What's going on here?
Well, like I tweeted it. I WhatsApped it straight after and tweeted it as well. X'd it, whatever you want to say. They've never scored at our stadium, at our new stadium. Like as Charlie just said, let alone get a draw or even a win. They've missed penalties there. They've had opportunities, right? Aguero gets a penalty saved by Lloris back in the day in the quarter-final of the Champions League first leg. Still can't score. So I think we're in their head, and that's great. I was worried it was going to get West Brom away because they're definitely in our head. From a bogey team scenario. So look, I mean, I think it's what Charlie said. You've got to enjoy it, right? What we want, yes, we want a cup. But if Tottenham Hotspur go and win the FA Cup and beat Maidstone, Newport, bloody, a depleted different Burnley side, whatever along the way, everyone would just turn around and go, yeah, but you didn't play anyone. It was easy. So, the fact of the matter is, if you've got, like a little bit like Gary Mabbott said, right, you've got to beat the best. To be the best, you've got to beat the best. So if it was at the Etihad, I'd be more worried. I think at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, with it rocking under the lights, hopefully that's probably going to be a Saturday evening game or a late afternoon Sunday game, or I don't know, it could be a Tuesday 1 o'clock kickoff the way FA Cup games are scheduled. Ridiculous. But if that's under the lights at the Lane against Man City, I think these are big games, guys, viewers and listeners, aren't they? And this is what it's all about. It's about big games. I just hope the club look at the fans and look at the ticketing situation and price it accordingly for an FA Cup match rather than it being a Cat A game in the Premier League, which obviously it isn't. And look, just a quick piece on the Madison Romero thing. I've got a sneaky feeling that they're going to do a Bentancur and all of a sudden they're going to rock up and we're going to have. I mean, if these two guys come back, even if it isn't for Man United, but when these two guys come back, start looking at our squad options now. It is scary for other people in the league. And that sounds probably a bit nothing behind that. But you've got to remember, it was only 10 games ago that we were top of the league with a full strength side. It's only 10 games ago. Yes, we've had our absolute decimation through injuries like other teams have. United have gone through it. Newcastle have definitely gone through it. Even Brighton have had some big injuries. But some of them other clubs that are above us, they've had hardly any injury problems. And we've had virtually a whole team out being injured. Now they're starting to come back. So this could be a huge month for signings, which I know you're clucking to get into, Rick. But also, it's a huge month, isn't it, lads? Let's be honest, viewers and listeners, of people coming back into the football club that have been sorely missed. And even when you say about the AFCON and the Asia Cup, Werner's having a medical as we talk right now. He might be available or will be available to play against Man United as an example. And if we can get Drăgușin, I don't know how you say it, Charlie, you have to tell us. But if you can get Drăgușin over the line, and some of these other players coming back, honestly, guys, viewers and listeners, I'm thinking, I think we could be very, very, very strong. Exactly.
Even Charlie's at it now. What are you doing to the guy?
Ricky, you wanted optimism, mate. There you go. I mean, I think, to be fair, this isn't blind faith, though, this time around. We've seen the first 10 games, what Tottenham are doing. The football we've been playing, even in the last 10 games, with huge decimation, has still been quality. Do you see where I'm coming from? So, if we can add some good people in with these people coming, these players coming back as well, who knows? Let's just run with it and just have fun this year.
Absolutely. Look, you know what I say on Last One Spurs? We are conscious of time to get off the bingo cards. Macca will stick with you and you can open us up here on this Last One on Spurs.
Okay, but of course. So, Ange Postecoglou has made an instant impact, Charlie, as Tottenham Hotspur head coach. Spurs currently sitting 5th in the table, as we was just talking about, just 1 point off the top 4. And bizarrely, really, 6 points off the top of the Premier League. We're in the hat for the FA Cup, obviously, now against Man City, as we know, along with playing some incredible, breathtaking football we've just talked about as well. What have you made, Charlie, of Postecoglou's start to the season?
I think it's been incredibly impressive by any metric. And obviously throw in the fact that they lost Kane on the eve of the season. I think people were kind of thinking this season would be, what they wanted above all was just to have some fun, feel like they've got the excitement back and that they're playing good football and all of that. And obviously they've absolutely had that. But also to have those results in those first 10 games that you mentioned, 8 wins, 2 draws to go top. And I think sometimes to take a step back and just reflect on how impressive it is that they've managed to stay, not that in the last 10 games. Basically, you've got half the season with a squad that has been decimated by injuries and suspensions. And obviously suspensions is your own doing. You can't whinge about that. But yeah, I think he's done amazingly well. He's completely changed the whole feel of the club, which was, one of the things he was brought in to do. So yeah, he's a great person to cover. He's great to listen to at press conferences. He's got a lot to say on a lot of topics. It's been great, really, really enjoyable and encouraging first, 7 months now for him.
Charlie,
sorry, sorry, Vic, I know you want to move. Just on that in the press conferences, because obviously you get to see the setup, the behind the scenes piece. We only get to see what's now videoed by the time Ange sat down and then a couple of questions each. Obviously, you get embargo sections and stuff that's released afterwards. But is there any other time to kind of do small talk with him? Because we've heard so many times from Good Self or Ali Gold about, he doesn't really do small talk and that sort of stuff. I mean, do you get a sense of there is a small talk guy in there? Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
After somebody's so nice, you want to have a beer with him. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's funny, because obviously that's something he talks about a lot. Yeah, that he's someone who's very comfortable talking. I mean, a story that sums that up. When we were in Perth for the pre-season tour, a few of us journalists, we then had a sit down with him for about 45 minutes, which was probably the most intimate kind of environment we've had with him. It was really fascinating to chat to him. But he was saying how he'd just given a talk in front of hundreds of people, and it had gone down really well, etc. And he's very comfortable doing that sort of thing. But he said he found it harder doing a bit of small talk after with some of the people who wanted to come up and talk to him, which kind of tells you quite a lot about him. I mean, I've sort of had, we all have like little interactions with him, and he's very very polite, very personable. And a few times at press conferences, people have come over from Australia, I think journalists who he's known from back in the day, and he'll stop and have a chat with those people. So I think he's quite modest about it. He's perfectly good at doing that sort of thing. I think he just feels, he's not someone who kind of enjoys particularly having long conversations that some people might. But yeah, but I definitely think he's personable, but he's got an edge to him, and I think we've started to see that in the last few weeks in press conferences. I think there was this perception, which I challenged kind of at the start. I think because partly because he's Australian, I think he was often described as kind of cuddly and avuncular and all this sort of thing. Like, he's got an edge. Like, he doesn't suffer fools. And if you ask him a question that he doesn't think is sensible, or it might be something that he feels he's covered, or is kind of hinting at something he doesn't like, he'll tell you.
I find that fascinating. Again, we make that point, don't we? That again, we only see, obviously, of course, the pressers and everything that goes, obviously, inside the first presser, then obviously the embargoed one. So to again get a glimpse of what it is like dealing with the man. Obviously, beyond that, is so we obviously don't have a chance to see. One thing that we have known, Charlie, is that the fact that he recently deeply disappointed has been to lose Cristian Romero after the Star was the latest of what's been a number of really key high-profile players that have been ruled out for injury for Tottenham. Of course, look, when you consider the fact Spurs have had injuries to Mickey van der Ven, James Maddison, Rodrigo Bentancur, of course, who's since recovered, Manor Solomon, Ryan Sessegnon has since recovered, Ivan Perisic, Heung-min Son, Yves Bissouma, Pat Mate Sarr. Those are players also that he's having now to deal with that are away at their respective internal tournaments, of course, African Nations Cup, the obviously Asia Cup with Heung-min Son. And then when you take into account the suspension Spurs have had, Destiny Udogie, Cristian Romero, Yves Bissouma, Dejan Kulusevski, what have you made, Charlie, the way this man has navigated the season so far, given those huge amount of injuries, those huge amount of suspensions? And I don't want to bring in other ex-managers, but I feel the likes of maybe the previous 2 or 3 would not have been able to deal with that, both internally and then outwardly in press conferences, about just the way he's like, we've got to get on with it. I mean, what do you make of the way he's navigated that, Charlie?
Yeah, I think it's been really important to demonstrate, or to kind of prove one of his points, that, he will just get on with it, and that if the system is right and in place and the players buy into it, then they'll get results, almost not irrespective of who plays, because he's also said clearly that having better players, of course, makes a bigger difference. But it's really, I think as well, the fact that even with those injuries and suspensions, he has continued to do what he's doing. I think it was really important and something similar has happened in his previous jobs at Celtic and at Brisbane Roar, that even when the backs were against the wall, he didn't compromise. And I think that was really important to show the players, because it's fine. You know, a lot of managers might say that, you know, they'll say, no, I really believe in this way of playing, but do they actually really believe in it? Will they, you know, when it comes to it, their jobs are on the line. So might they actually think, you know what, I'll play a bit defensive. I'll try and nick a result here. He hasn't really done that. And I think that has actually kind of strengthened his position with how he's perceived internally. They're in no doubt now that if you want to play for him, you're going to have to play this way. And so, yeah, I think to have turned what would have been a negative for 90% of managers. And, you know, you mentioned, you know, some of his predecessors. 4 years ago, Spurs lost Sissoko and Kane on New Year's Day, and then Son a month later. And there was so much gloom around the place. And clearly Mourinho was so angry and kind of railing at the injustice, which I kind of understand, because I think that's how most fans feel, you know, and they got all the injuries. I think most fans were going like, why has this happened to us? We're top of the league. And he just sort of got on with it. And yeah, I think it's been incredibly impressive.
But again, just on that, before I've got to move on to more injuries and suspensions, no doubt. And again, I think that's a reflection, massive reflection on Ange, because, you know, people talk about positive toxicity or negative versus positive, but actually, if you're going in saying we can't run, we're knackered, we're bare bones, we've got too many injuries, that can only have a knock-on effect to the player's mentality, in my opinion. So the fact that Ange hasn't done that, the fact that Ange has done the opposite almost and said, you know, we are where we are, we've got some challenges, but that's what it's all about. It balances itself out, and been almost, Charlie, Ricky, matter-of-factly about it. That's kind of how we've got on with our games. Look, we're going to lose a few lads. We're going to win a few lads, but you know, at the end of the day, we just got to get on with it. You guys have got to step up. And that feels like how we've played. Like, we outplayed Aston Villa. I don't think anyone can disagree with that. Yes, we lost the game. We outplayed West Ham as well. I don't think anyone can disagree with that. Yes, we lost the game. But we were still playing our football, to back to your point around that belief system and about, you know, where we are. And bearing in mind, this is with 9 people out, 7 people out. This is the backup team that cannot, no way, play Ange ball. They cannot. They're not good enough. But we've been playing it, creating 8-9 chances on target against Aston Villa with 5 or 6 of your first teamers out. Do you see where I'm coming from, lads, viewers and listeners? So I think for me, it's been really impressive the way he's handled that situation. And Postecoglou said previously that it made both easy and difficult for Spurs with regards to him having one main target in each priority position in the summer, and whether or not that works effectively in January or in this month, essentially. You know, most clubs have little interest in losing players. Since then, we've spoken. Spurs have made a couple of integral key internal appointments, not just let's blame Daniel Levy or not blame him if we get the right person, because we've now got Scott Munn starting his role as the Chief Football Officer, and Johan Lange as the Technical Director. We've also got confirmation as well that Fabio Paratici is still cooking somewhere in the background from a consultancy basis. So really keen to know from you, Charlie, how that dynamic is working now as a group when they come together, planning the recruitment behind the scenes. It feels like in the summer, the recruitment was very good, actually. It feels like it's a lot better than it has been, but that dynamic's changed quite a lot, hasn't it, since the summer?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Postecoglou talked about that, the fact that, you know, during the summer, his first transfer window, and how important that was. He was operating without a director of football, and that's extremely unusual. Obviously, Paratici was there in that consultancy basis that you mentioned, and, you know, you look at signings like Gallini, that was someone who Paratici had looked at before when Antonio Conte was the manager. So he, you know, he's still an important figure at the club. You look at someone like Drăgușin coming from Genoa. That's obviously, you know, a market Paratici knows well. But yeah, Langer's come in as the technical director, and he's got a team working into him. He's very data focused. I mean, essentially how it works, Postecoglou. What's good about Postecoglou is that it may not necessarily just be one target, but he's very clear on what he wants and the kind of players he wants. So he'll have his ideas, even maybe before Langer and his team have gone away and started looking for players. But then once they have done that, they'll kind of reconvene with him and talk about okay, well, this is what we've picked up. These are the sort of players that we think would work. And Ange will always have kind of the final say. But so to look at someone like Timo Werner, he was someone who Ange has liked for a long time, thinks he can kind of fit into his way of playing. And so, he trusts, then in collaboration with Langer and his team, once they kind of, have their say and do their research, then they'll kind of all agree on those targets. So it does feel, I mean, the key thing is alignment. You hear that word all the time, and you think back to kind of Conte, Paratici era, and as much as people thought they were close, and obviously they had a history of working together, but what they wanted was often quite different. You've got Paratici looking broadly for one of those younger players. Conte wants people who can come and hit the ground running right then, there and then. It doesn't really you need to have people pushing in the same direction. And I think they have that now. And that's why you're seeing it's a pretty clear transfer policy. I mean, I think if you look at the summer and then look again what they're trying to do, I think most people can kind of see what the purpose is. Whereas I always think back to that 2022 summer window and Spurs signed 2 left wing backs. One was Ivan Perisic, 33. One was Destiny Udogie, 19. And you could say, okay, well, they're kind of building for now and the future. But to me, that kind of summarized how kind of poles apart Conte and Paratici were.
It's an interesting point you make there, Charlie. I mean, it really is interesting. On the point of obviously being a bit more structure and just a bit more of a process now, it feels that's the same way in terms of the contractual situation at Spurs. Obviously, we've seen recently Destiny Udogie put in pen to paper on a long-term deal. That was then soon to be followed up by Pat Matassar, who committed his future to the club until 2030. I just wonder now, looking at our contractual situation, I mean, Spurs are in no immediate danger of losing any players in terms of expiring of contracts. But given the fact that we've got Sonny, Giovanni Lo Celso, Bentancur and Basuma coming into the last 2-3 years of their contracts, do you feel Spurs are looking at any of those respective players at the moment and trying to get extra deals in place to just tie down the long-term future of those gents?
I think, Son will, there's an extension that they can trigger and they'll do that. It's kind of a question of when, not if, which I think will take him to 2026. So I think that's all fine. Those other ones, I mean, I think Spurs are in a good position that they kind of hold the power with a lot of those. I mean, yeah, Bentancur, I think, once he gets back up and playing regularly, then maybe that's someone they look at in the way they have with Sarr and Udogie. I mean, they obviously want to future-proof themselves. I mean, you remember that Pochettino era when it felt like every week there was a picture of him with his arm around a player who just signed a new contract. And maybe Spurs are entering into a kind of similar period because they want to tie these players down. I think the players, as we've seen with Udogie, with Sarr, they're enthused by what Ange is doing and the direction the club's going in. With someone like Lo Celso, maybe that's a bit less clear because has he done enough to earn a new contract? Might be kind of more the way some would frame that. He's been good, but I think he needs to stay fit for a long period to show that he's necessarily a long-term proposition. So I think they're fairly relaxed with most of those. I think they feel confident that they've got a lot to offer. And, the reality is now Premier League clubs, their wealth and riches mean that it's probably easier to retain players. There's less of that risk. From back in the day, we'd fear kind of our best players being picked off from Spanish clubs or Italian clubs and that sort of thing. But you see less of that nowadays.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. I mean, one of our own, Richard Cracknell, the great crackers, it's just actually asked you a direct question. So I'm just going to put it up before going on to the next one. Can you, Charlie, see us going into the Asia kind of Australian player market, given the links now with Man and Ange? And the influence of Son, I've got to be honest, I thought we would have definitely been going in for somebody like a Jota that he'd already had at Celtic, as an example. But it doesn't seem like that we do that. Can you see him going into them sorts of markets?
Yeah, it's funny because I was talking about this with a colleague yesterday because Son's a bit of an outlier. I mean, obviously, he's been such a hit, and then Spurs have a big kind of commercial operation in Korea. They toured there, and then last year they went to Thailand and Singapore. So clearly, and then they've been to Asia many times since signing Son. But also Son came from a German club, so it wasn't like they, were kind of scouting in that market necessarily to get him. I do definitely think, I mean, Postecoglou's talked about this before. Obviously, he had great success with Celtic. He he signed players from the Asian markets then, and they did very well. And I think there was an assumption that some of those maybe would follow him to Spurs. Obviously, that hasn't happened. But I think it is something they will look into, because Postecoglou is really, really convinced that that's where you can gain an edge on your rivals, is by going to those markets that maybe other people haven't, or look at what Brighton have done with Mitoma.
Exactly, Mitoma. He springs to mind, doesn't it? And even Enzo, not Enzo, who's
Endo
Liverpool?
at Liverpool, yeah.
Endo, yeah. There's definitely some unbelievable talent in their markets. And I remember you might have actually asked him the question in one of the presses. It was a few weeks before Christmas, and he talked about that. It might have been the embargo session, forgive me, but he talked about the fact that he's got a lot of. There could, like you just said, alluded to there could be a lot of advantage in their markets, because they tend to snub them because they're not in the big five leagues, or you know what I mean. So you can go and get some gems out there. So maybe it's a summer thing, Charlie, rather than a January thing, right?
Yeah, I definitely think it's one to keep an eye on in the kind of short to medium term, because I think Ange Postecoglou will be convinced that there are really good players there that have been overlooked. Because look at his whole journey. He always talks about this, the way he was overlooked because of his nationality. And he's so hot on the fact that nationality or background should never be a barrier. So I think he would love to go and find someone from those markets that no one else was looking at, the next Mitoma or whoever it is.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, as we all know, we banged on about it long enough on this podcast as well, that the priority in the final weeks of the summer window is bringing in another centre-back. I was very vocal, thought we needed another 2 centre-backs rather than just the one. But nonetheless, it was a priority, with a potential player that can play within the front three as well. Before we go into specific names on players, Charlie, do you know if there's any other positions in the squad where Spurs are kind of targeting during this window and even in the summer window?
Yeah, the other priority, getting the wide forward, or central forward kind of hybrid like Werner was one priority. The main one, as you say, was a centre back, and then it's a midfielder. The complication there is, and that's kind of the third of those priorities. The first two were kind of absolute prerequisites. We need to do this. We feel we're short in the attacking positions, and obviously at centre back. With midfield, they do have a lot of midfielders. It's just whether kind of they have the ones necessarily that they want. You think of someone like Højbjerg, who, credit to him, he's been a good squad player this season, but he's not one who's long for Ange ball, I don't think. So then it becomes a question of, okay, well, maybe can you shift someone like him? But the problem with Højbjerg, and Spurs have ran into this problem a lot over the last couple of years, as have most of their rivals, is that who do you sell these players to? Because most clubs on the continent can't really afford them for the kind of prices that Spurs are asking for. And then back in the day, well, maybe you could sell them to a Premier League club that was, a bit below you in the food chain. But now Premier League clubs can bully financially clubs from most other countries. So if you're Crystal Palace, why would you spend 25 million on a 28-year-old Højbjerg when you can spend that 25 million probably on a really exciting up-and-comer from, say, the Dutch league? Yeah, so they're in a bit of a bind with that.
And he was heavily linked, wasn't he? Sorry to interrupt. He was heavily linked, wasn't he? Pierre-Emile Højbjerg was heavily linked with Fulham and also Atletico Madrid in the summer. So I don't know whether there was any, again, like you say, like with Atletico as an example, they probably don't have the money, certainly on I think they was only offering a loan, weren't they, back in the summer?
Exactly.
They're not going to come and stump up 25 million or 28 million now in January transfer window, are they?
Exactly. And in the summer, they would have let him go if they'd got a good enough offer, but they didn't. And then again, this window, you've got a club like Ajax who are interested in him, but they're just not going to pay that kind of money. I don't think anyone's going to be feeling sympathy towards the big Premier League clubs, because it's that financial disparity that allows them to sign the players they can. But it does mean the flip side of it is that it can be hard to sell your players. And so I think they would ideally like to get a midfielder in, but it might be dependent on an outgoing. And I think it's just tricky to do. I always think in January, you want as few things to do as possible. And the problem with something like that is it's maybe too many moving parts, but we'll see. I mean, sometimes these things open up late on in the window.
Charlie, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to grab a cheeky question from the audience here, if you don't mind, and let me know if you can answer it if you can't at the moment. Martin McDonald says, how are Spurs positioned in relation to FFP? Can we be hopeful that our business model is well positioned? Now, there's one thing about Spurs that I don't think you can level at them or criticise them for, is that in the last 20 years under ENIC, I'm gonna get a lot of stick. I don't know why I picked this now. I'm gonna get so much stick for this. I think the one thing that I know, isn't it now? Now I'm done. Now I'm on the payroll now. Watch it, I'm on the payroll now.
I know you are. Where's your free merch?
I don't know. Where is it? Where is it? I think the one thing that you can say under Nick is that Spurs have been financially run pretty sound. And I think the one thing about Spurs in direct correlation to some of their rivals is they haven't really been spoken about of having a number of issues around FFP. Do we take it as far as we are aware, things are okay and there's money there to be spent? Because I know the big thing around the summer was Spurs, of course, have sold Harry Kane, arguably the club's greatest ever striker. We are going to come on to Werner in a second, I promise. But I think there's an indication that many feel that money is still really yet to be spent. Is it a case that Spurs are trying to balance the books at the moment? What do you feel about the financial position of the club?
Well, Spurs are in a better position than some of their rivals when it comes to FFP and the Premier League's rules on spending. And you only have to look at the fact that Everton have got into trouble. And there might be other clubs as well. There were reports recently about Nottingham Forest as well, weren't there? So I think it'd be a big vindication for ENIC if the rules were more strictly enforced, because they have always been respecters of it, much to some supporters' frustration, I think. They do have a bit more headroom with FFP. And, you just look down the road at Arsenal, they basically can't sign anyone because of FFP restrictions. So I think it is a reminder that which is partly why as well. And again, I think it probably frustrated some supporters, but first of all, Spurs did spend actually a reasonable amount of money in the summer. I think that's often forgotten because it was kind of done fairly incrementally. But if they had just thought, well, we've got to spend the money now, let's do it. But that then does massively reduce what you can do in January. So I think they can feel quite good about the financial position they're in. And certainly you look at another rival of theirs, Chelsea, who are, doing all that they're doing and are fairly restricted now as well. Spurs at least can go and make a signing or two this window and not feel that that's, a risk to their complying with FFP.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So just following on, just want to the Ivan Toney stuff that was, people were heavily linking Ivan Toney with Arsenal and that sort of stuff. He's obviously just come out and done that exclusive interview. I mean, there's no reason why he's definitely staying at Brentford. He's definitely not going to Arsenal based on that FFP thing as well. And they're not going to drop another 100 million, are they? They can't, can they, Charlie?
Exactly, yeah. And Tony's an interesting one because I know we reported in the summer that Spurs were looking at him. He was a player they were looking at. But obviously that would have been for January because of his ban in the summer. But I think that, that's a big... there are a lot of moving parts with that. The fact that he hasn't played for so long. He might take a bit of time to get up to speed. There are other clubs interested as well. And ultimately, that's not one that's materialised. But I do think as well, it's such an important signing to get right. And Timo Werner is not that signing. No one is suggesting at Spurs that Timo Werner is a Harry Kane replacement or that, he's the answer necessarily. The view that, and sorry, Rick, to jump into Timo Werner, because I know you had a question on him, but may as well start covering it now. That's a very different signing. That's, okay, can someone come in as a bit of a stopgap? And if he's good, we can make it permanent. Fine, win-win. But that kind of big ticket forward, whether it's someone who's primarily comfortable on as a wide forward or through the middle. And I think, by the way, we need to get used to the fact that it's a bit more fluid nowadays. It doesn't have to necessarily be a kind of conventional number 9. I don't think that should be rushed into. They've already brought in Brennan Johnson and obviously James Maddison, although not a forward, he was kind of brought in partially to make up for the creativity deficit with Kane going out. I think it's not something. It's not worth just going out and signing someone for the sake of it. And look, they've scored in 34 straight Premier League games, so they're not doing too badly in that respect.
It's crazy when you look at that stat. I know you were going to talk about Werner, sorry, Rick, but when you look at that stat, Charlie, you just said that. I think we are joint now with Liverpool. To be fair to Liverpool, but we've got the most outfield goals as well. We've only had one penalty as well, by the way, the whole season in the Premier League. I mean, it's actually crazy, isn't it, of how many goals we're actually scoring. Considering, again, coming back into where we're putting the context around it, if you went and took out Saliba, Gabriel, Odegaard, and
Rice.
Jesus out of Arsenal, Rice or Rice out of Arsenal, where are they in the league? You know, we're still 6 points off the top, having had all of them core players out for the best part of 2 months. It's astounding, really.
It is. This is what we are going to do. We are going to go for our belated first break of this show for our listeners on audio. I am joined by the crazy instructor, the conductor, the runner of this epic train. Lee McQueen is back alongside me. Listen, I'll tell you what, you know, when transfer shows are getting more and more serious, when Lee McQueen's rocking up and turning up, I think it's because this man is on us with us here on Last One Spurs. We've got wonderful Charlie Eccleshare, Spurs correspondent for The Athletic. Of course, you know him from the Football Cliches, View from the Lane, Totally Football Show. Busy month. Listen, we're absolutely delighted and humbled to have Charlie join us here. Look, we have got to ramp it up. I used to make that joke, we've got to ramp it up like a Adama Traore. It's probably the first time in about 4 windows where Adama Traore is not a target. Jason McGovern will be happy with that for sure. Listen, Charlie, you mentioned him before the break there. Timo Werner looks like he's coming through the door. We understand that he slept out Hotspur way last night. For our listeners on audio, he may very well already be a Spurs player by the time this show does go out for your ears to listen to. Look, you referenced it there. He's not a Harry Kane replacement. But I described it on Sky in the last couple of days as, for me, a potential one where it's very much low risk, but really potentially high reward, depending if Ange can get the absolute best out of Timo Werner. Now, when you look at his career stats as a whole, 405 appearances, 150 goals, 79 assists. Look, that would tell you the guy has got goals in him. He has got, obviously, a contribution when it comes to forward areas in terms of the front three Spurs are going to link up upon. I know, again, on the View from the Lane, you were very much adamant that this could work for Tottenham. Again, I'll maybe push you further on that. Is this a player that you feel can come in and have an actual genuine massive impact on the club and potentially earn himself a summer move, which, to my understanding, having read some of the reports out there, would be a fee of no more than around 15.5 million?
Yeah, I think I can see the logic in it. I mean, I think it's fairly clear. They want someone who can come in, hit the ground running, someone who's got Premier League experience, has lived in London before, can play in a number of roles. I just think for what's out there, like, you're not gonna, if you're making a signing in January, that's partly the fact that you're able to get them is probably because things aren't working out so well at their club. You know, otherwise they wouldn't be allowed to go, or you have to spend a huge amount of money because the club knows that you're desperate. You know, and you think back to Kulusevski, someone who Juve didn't really want. That's why Spurs were able to get him, and the skill is being able to turn those players who, for whatever reason, have kind of fallen out of favour where they are or whatever. And that's what's happened to Werner. But I think, you know, Postecoglou believes there's a really good player there still, and that he can get the best out of him. And I kind of think, worst case scenario, he's not great, but even that, he's still a useful rotational option to have in that front three. Best case scenario, he becomes a regular starter. So he either kind of upgrades Spurs' starting options, which would be great. That would be best case scenario, or he upgrades the squad. Because, you know, think back to that City away game. They started Brian Hill on the left wing. And no disrespect to Brian Hill, but that is not really ideal. Then Brian Hill, it wasn't really working for him. They had to make a change at half time. The only option they had was Højbjerg. That's who they had to bring on for him. Like, that's where their squad, that's where Spurs' options, that's what their options have been this season. So to me, the idea that Werner won't be a big improvement on that is just madness. And it's a loan with an option. If he isn't good enough, just don't make the option permanent. I think for what you can be annoyed that Spurs want or need a stopgap, fine. But accepting that they do, I just don't think there's that much better that's out there than someone of his ability, his experience. He's won the Champions League. His scoring record in the Champions League is pretty decent, actually. So to me, it just feels like a kind of ideal low-risk January signing.
And a really quick follow-up question, if I can, before Macca comes in there, Charlie, if you don't mind. Just really keen to know from where you feel this now leaves Richarlison's long-term future at the football club. Because before Burnley, he had 5 in 5. But I feel what is becoming a constant on a lot of different Spurs media, whether it's podcast or different outlets out there, is that there seems to be this long-term question over Richarlison. Is he able to fit into an Ange Postecoglou system? Is he able to genuinely contribute the 15 to 20 goals a season? We know his best return at Everton, I believe, was 15 goals. It hasn't been any more than that. And whether he can actually be that player that steps up to be, I don't think anyone can be Tottenham's Harry Kane, but the question is, can he be Spurs' main prime striker? By the fact they've gone out and they've now gone to get Werner would seem to suggest there is a doubt over Richie. Where do you feel Richarlison's long-term future is at Spurs for you?
Well, I think it depends on what he wants and what Spurs expect from him, because hopefully, Spurs aim is to be in the Champions League next season, and if they want to be competitive in the Champions League and the league, you need that carousel of 5 or 6 pretty good forwards. Is Richarlison good enough to be one of them? Yeah, absolutely. I think he is. So it comes down to then whether, is he going to be a starting player, or again, is he going to be a kind of rotational option? And I think that's unclear right now. I kind of suspect it would be more the latter. I struggle to imagine him, becoming the kind of undisputed, I'm going to play every week kind of level, like say Son is. But I think he could be at that rung just below. Then it comes down to whether he wants to do that. He might not. He might prefer to go and play every week for a club maybe not quite at Spurs' level. Or he might be like, yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to play 30 games in all comps and be a useful option. And then again, then is what Spurs want. Do they think, well, we might be able to cash in on this guy? Or do they think he's really useful for that role? That's personally where I think he's more likely to end up if he stays. I feel like he's the kind of player who Ange is doing really well with and kind of getting the best out of him. I'm just not sure his ceiling maybe is high enough to be a kind of regular starter for a team that is aspiring to kind of be in the Champions League and be competing for the Premier League.
Thing is, if he can stay on side with Madders coming back and putting them through balls through, classic triangle on your PlayStation controller, you can put them through balls through. If he can stay on side, this bloke can score some serious amounts of goals for us.
Well, he's going to get chances, isn't he? He already is.
Without a doubt, he's going to get chances. The only problem is, during his Chelsea career, he actually missed 23 big chances. It's quite a lot. But yeah, I mean, I agree with both of what you're saying and a lot of the comments, right? It is a bit of a low risk, high reward type scenario. And actually, if you can get him in behind people, if you can score a couple of goals, a couple of assists, then it seems like it's a bit of a no-brainer. I just go back to from a negative point of view. I just go back to Louis Saha and Ryan Nelson. That transfer window back in the day under Harry. Let's not have a repeat of that. Are we getting a Ryan Nelson in Drăgușin and a Louis Saha in Werner? Right? When we needed some quality. I suppose only time will tell. That brings me nicely, actually, Charlie, onto who I'm calling, based on the great jar wobble, Dragusin. Spurs, we say Spurs are reportedly in advanced talks. We are in advanced talks. We understand, as all of the outlets are saying now, that we're very, very close on the add-ons of 4.5 plus Jed Spence, which emerged yesterday. Now we're reading live, actually, as we chat, that Jed Spence is taking some time and wondering whether or not he wants to go to Genoa. So, obviously negotiations are continuing today. To your knowledge, is this now Spurs' number one target this month based on the fact that Werner's already having a medical? Do you think this will be the next one over the line, Charlie?
Well, he's definitely their main target, and he's someone they've put a lot into. So from this point, and Bayern Munich are interested. That interest is real. So obviously they need to make sure that kind of doesn't scupper it. And they obviously are doing everything they can to get it over the line. I think it's really important that it does. If it does, you're suddenly talking about two important signings. The two of the main signings really done in the first knockings of the window. That is very, very rare. Spurs in January.
Do all of my care with that, Charlie. To be fair,
they do not sign players. Before I looked into it, it was something mad. Like I think 7 of the last 9 have been on deadline day or that sort of thing in January, and the other 2 were late in the window. So this is kind of unheard of. They could both play against United, but there's still work to be done. It's not done yet. But yeah, fingers crossed on that one because he is the main target.
Can I ask you, Chad, if you don't mind? Go on. You want to come back in, Mecca?
Sure? I was just going to say, he's the main target, but kind of in your knowledge as well, Charlie, he seems to fit the system and the Postecoglou way as well. Obviously, that's probably why he's the main target. But like all of us, we've been ferrying around on YouTube compilations and all that sort of stuff around him. I mean, do you know much about Drăgușin, the player? I mean, he's 21, he's 6'3". He's he seems like quite an aggressive type, if you know what I mean, like the way Ange Postecoglou likes to play. I mean, it'd be a good signing for us, right?
Yeah, he's very front-footed. From speaking to people who know him in Romania and in Italy, that's something that comes across. And in some of the clips I've watched, he can be great. He can also be, he's still young, so he's still learning. He can be quite Romero-like, I suppose, and really go smashing into tackles. When it works, it's great. Can leave him a bit exposed. But I think, it's all there for him to be really good in this system. He's good at getting forward as well. He's got a bit of an eye for a goal. I think he looks like a proper defender, but also somebody who likes to step into the opposition half, which is key to how Ange wants to play. It looks like another one that should fit in with the system very nicely.
Gosh, Charlie, before I ask you about a couple more defensive targets that we've seen mentioned to Spurs this window, how comfortable do you feel the club are by how public this transfer is playing out? Now, again, for many out there, I don't want to worry people because it's not my place to do that, although I do seem to do that a lot. Obviously, Bastoni, if we go back a couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk around Bastoni. Lee nearly had him on the back of his shirt.
I actually think I ordered Bastoni on the back of my shirt. Not because I thought we'd get him, just to try and get him over the line.
Someone had to try and get this guy over the line.
That might convince him.
These fans need him.
Listen, if Macca's got him on the back of his shirt, of course he's going to want to join the bloody football club.
I can't believe that didn't convince him.
I know. What's going on these days? If Macca's on the back of your shirt, how can that not convince you? Honestly, get them all in. I just want to ask the question, how comfortable the club would be around the fact that it's being played out so publicly this, when you consider the fact that with Werner, I mean, in the space of 24 hours, it feels like from the most it was reported, it was pretty much a done deal. The fact he was travelling for a medical. Where do you stand in terms of how comfortable the club are with the frequent, constant churn on social media? Which, to be fair, listen, we all feed into it. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of the way the world works. What do you make of it?
Well, I think in an ideal world, all clubs would want none of this stuff to come out. Actually, I'll qualify that. They wouldn't want stuff that's unhelpful to them to come out. Obviously, some clubs, it might be useful for them for certain things to be out in the same way that we see agents deciding that it's quite useful for it to be known that, say, another club is interested in them. So it's all a bit of a game. But generally, clubs, they want discretion. They want to, I guess like in any of our own lives, we don't really want what we're doing necessarily to be public knowledge. Obviously, they appreciate that journalists have got to do their job and things are going to come out. And as I say, some things might be helpful for them to come out. They, I think, generally just have to hope that whatever's going on isn't going to actually affect the deals. And that's the only time where where it's obviously going to be a big issue for them is, if something comes out that could potentially scupper things. Now, in this case, I don't think there's been anything necessarily like that. It has been, there has been a kind of constant update, but it's not been on anything especially sensitive. I mean, I guess the one fear a club might have is if it feels like they're absolutely desperate, and that's why, for instance, what you'll see is clubs really, really don't want injuries necessarily coming out during January, because that weakens your hand. If the selling club knows that, oh, wait a minute, haven't they just lost their right winger to an injury? That's not really ideal. But I don't think, so I think it slightly depends on the nature of the signing. What I do know is that they'll be desperate for it to just be done, and they can, because, as fans or journalists or whatever, we get impatient, but they'll also want this to be done. And in the case of Drăgușin, they want it done ideally before Friday's deadline. Then he could be in the squad for the game on Sunday. But they're not the only ones involved. Nowadays with transfers, you've got so many stakeholders, players' agent, the clubs, various intermediaries. It's not always as easy as it seems from the outside when, often to people, understandably, it's just like, how did this take 10 days to reach a point you could have done in one? But there are complications.
Yeah, I just feel like the mood of Spurs' social media is on Jed Spence's shoulders. Jed, don't let us down. Make the move to Genoa. It's lovely there. I'm sure Crackers will recommend you somewhere lovely to stay in Genoa. Bless him. I'm sure he will, 100%. Look, we have been, again, name-checked with a lot of different other defensive targets. I'll rattle a couple of them and you can let us know if there's any real genuine interest there. Obviously, we have seen Ashley Phillips go out on loan. Lee's going to ask you in a second about Eric Dyer and where we stand on him. Tosin Adebayo, Mark Gahey, Lloyd Kelly, Jared Braithwaite and Joe Gomez. Any of those names you feel that are a genuine interest to Spurs, potentially maybe, if not this window, but in the summer?
Yeah, those have all been on Spurs' list. Gomez may have been. That's not one that I know specifically, but the others, yes. And some will be revisited in the summer. Someone like Tosin will be out of contract, so that's one where it's potentially, will that be opened up again? Lloyd Kelly's got injury problems, so that was again one that was largely parked. And Gay, someone
he'll fit in fine then, Charlie.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Roll up. What's one more injury? And yeah, Gay, someone they've liked for a long time, but that's always been complicated because of how much he'd cost. So yeah, there are some, and I think what is exciting is looking ahead for Spurs is that gradually, we're at such the early stage of the Postecoglou era, potentially, hopefully, and the squad is not in his image just yet. It's kind of halfway there, and the starting 11 feels like an Ange team, but the squad isn't. But what hopefully will happen over time is that the squad becomes an Ange squad, and so then you're able to rotate between players, all players he likes and trusts, rather than him having to kind of chuck players in and knowing they're probably not there for the long term, but hoping they can do a job.
For sure, and we touched upon before about. I quite like the look of Tosin. To be fair, I think he's got Premier League experience coming back into Tottenham as a free agent in the summer would be pretty good. If we get Drăgușin over the line now, that could be a good, decent backup or squad player. Eric Dier, we obviously, there's been a lot spoken about Eric Dier, regardless of what people's thoughts are or opinions are on him. He has been a very good long servant to the club, various different positions, but he's now heavily linked with Bayern Munich, and obviously now with the Drăgușin links coming through with Bayern Munich as well. We could end up with having Spence and Dier still at the football club, losing out on our main target, with Bayern taking not only our star striker in the summer, but also now potentially our star centre-back signing. This is a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
Obviously, on the plus side, we could sign Drăgușin, Eric Dier goes out, and also Spence goes out on loan as well. So where do you kind of sit on all of that chaos that I've just talked about?
I know it's a kind of it's a double whammy. That's what as soon as I saw Bayern were interested, I was thinking that's a double hit there, because you've got obviously would be taking Drăgușin and then not taking Dier. It's actually. It's all very incestuous, because then you've got Napoli in the mix, and Napoli are interested in both Drăgușin and Eric Dier. So it's all, how's it all going to kind of fall into place? Obviously, Spurs hope that they're the ones who get what they want. Bayern Munich have a lot of centre-back targets. Every day it feels like someone else is added to their list. I don't know how long that list is going to be by the end of the window, but Gary Mabbott might be on it by January 31st.
Not after that FA Cup draw, he won't be, Charlie.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't put out them balls, Gary.
But yeah, it's that's where we are. Dier and Bayern, basically, he's agreed personal terms. So if they decide to pull they're in a strong position there. If they want Dier, they can pull the trigger and get him, because that would be a great move for a player who's not playing at Spurs to go and play for one of the Champions League favourites, and link up with Harry Kane again. Would be a great result for him. But it just depends a little bit on if they can get some of their other targets.
So one to keep an eye on, you'd say, Charlie, on Eric Dier. One to keep an eye on?
Definitely.
Okay, fine. In terms of moving on to midfield, I am conscious of time. Strike off those bingo cards again. Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. Look, I think, again, Højbjerg to me has been a player that's given his everything to the football club. I think we're in a situation now where he's been asked to play a different type of football that isn't necessarily what he's personally suited to. And it's with no disrespect. At the end of every Spurs game, he is arguably one of the first down the tunnel. There's no real duty to be out there to the very, very end, although Ange just called it a nightclub, and normally lots do want to attend to the end of the sessions. Where do we stand, Charlie, on Pierre-Emile Højbjerg's future? Because we've heard reports that essentially Spurs aren't prepared to let Højbjerg go unless there is some form of a replacement coming through. And that has been outlined, and just for Tom, I'll bring him into play now, as potentially Conor Gallagher. Now, where we stand with Conor Gallagher is that a player there, and I'm sure Lee will want to mention this as well, at Chelsea captain as things stand at the moment, seems to be a player Pochettino really, really likes, with a very, very high fee. Where do we stand on Højbjerg maybe first, and then Lee, I'm sure, ask you about Conor Gallagher quickly.
Yeah, Højbjerg is basically, he wants to go. He's not playing enough. He's got Euros coming up. He knows he's out of favour. Spurs are open to him going. But like I was saying before, it's just whether someone comes in with a decent offer. It's where we were in the summer. It was the same situation. He wanted to go then. Spurs were willing to let him go then. I mean, I first reported that in June. That's how long this has been going on for. But if you don't get a decent offer, Spurs aren't going to be hustled into letting him go. And then on Conor Gallagher, yes, Spurs tried to get him on deadline day in the summer window, just gone. They're still interested. It's a weird position because you've got a Chelsea board potentially willing to let him go. Again, linking back to the FFP discussion we were having before, because he's an academy product, that's all profit. But he's Pochettino's captain and he doesn't want him to go. So I'd be surprised. I mean, if he did, then that's a big issue that Chelsea have got to resolve. If you're selling players that's your captain and is favoured by your manager. So I don't know. I'm kind of now at the point that there are so many moving parts in that. It didn't happen in the summer. I just wonder whether the can gets kicked down the road. Spurs think, well, Højbjerg's doing a job for us as a squad player. I mean, bear in mind, when the AFCON guys come back, you've got Bissouma, Sarr, Bentancur, Maddison, Lo Celso, Kulusevski. They're probably all ahead. Ollie Skip they're probably all ahead of Højbjerg. Potentially, maybe not Skip. Maybe they're kind of neck and neck. But how much is Højbjerg really going to have to play? But he's there if required. And obviously, we've seen with the volume of injuries Spurs have had that maybe he will be required at some point. But as I said, Ajax, they've been put off a bit. Juve were another club interested. Not sure they're going to stump up the cash. So that might just be one in the summer. And then at that point, he's only got a year left on his deal. And I think maybe there has to be compromise from all sides. But yeah, I think he's been good for the club, but they've sort of outgrown him a bit.
I know this wasn't part of the running order, Charlie. I know it wasn't part of the running order, but Oliver Skip. And again, I think I will suggest this. I know, again, a lot of the players, families watched last one on Spurs, that there's nothing personal against Oliver Skip. I just feel like where Spurs are going right now, I'm not too sure whether Skip as a player will be able to evolve into arguably what we want a Postecoglou player to do in midfield. Again, I know, granted, he's very, very young. And to be fair to Skip, for me, I've not seen him have enough frequent opportunities in matches to really gauge if he could really, really work in an Ange Postecoglou team. I mean, given the fact that you watch the guy very, very closely, obviously week in, week out, when he does get minutes, do you still have a confidence that Skip could be right for Spurs long-term under Ange? Or is it one that for you is pretty much still up in the air at the moment? And the same he has confirmed as that he would like to give a look at Ryan Sessegnon, who is now obviously coming back into fitness. Where do you stand on those couple of players?
I think with Skip, a bit like I was saying with Richarlison before, it sort of depends the sort of role he's happy to have. At the moment, it's hard to imagine Skip being a regular starter for Spurs, just because perhaps Sarr's been so good. And then they're getting Bentancur and Maddison back, and they've got Bissouma and the players I mentioned. But if you think on the first game of the season, it was Skip starting, Sarr on the bench. And I think a lot of people thought Skip would be really good for Ange in this system because of his energy levels, his ability to, play in lots of different positions on the pitch. He's so good at covering ground. I think if next season Spurs are going to be in Europe in some capacity, they're going to need decent depth. Oliver Skip is a very, very useful option to have. He's always going to put in everything. He's very, very fit, and would be someone that I think would be useful for them. But is that what he wants? I don't know. He might decide, there is a premium though. You're playing for the club you supported as a boy. You've come through the academy. I remember Phil Neville used to always say he'd rather play 25 games for United than 40 odd for another club. So that's something to consider. But I think it will come down to him. And I think Ange will be straight with him, come the summer. Let's see how many games he's played by the end of the season. If we're talking about, a couple or a few Premier League starts, I mean, he's probably already made that, hasn't he? But, if he doesn't make many more than that in the second half of the season, then there'll be a conversation to be had. And Ange might outline to him, look, we'd love to have you here, but you are only going to play this amount. And he might decide, well, okay, I'd rather go and be a regular for Crystal Palace or whatever club we're talking about.
That's quite a good club for him, Fulham or Crystal Palace. Or I do think Skippy is a Premier League player. It's just he probably doesn't fit Ange ball completely, and he's also not going to break into that first team as a result of that. But somebody to have in and around the squad, and whether or not, as you said, whether or not he wants to do that or not. But actually, that brings us over to kind of, two loanees that are back at the club, Jed Spence and, of course, Sergio Reguilon. We know about the Jed Spence situation with Genoa. Also, Ivan Perisic as well. Doesn't look like he's going to be playing for the club again. Did you see, Charlie, any kind of destinations for Perisic or Reguilon? Obviously, let's just assume that Jed Spence is going to agree to all of the demands that Levy wants on him for the Genoa, so we get Drăgușin.
Everyone just ushering him out the door.
Yeah. Any kind of information on that? And also, actually, lumping in there, Tanganga as well. We've got Tanganga.
Yeah.
He hasn't played a minute, I don't think, has he?
No. I mean, Perisic at some point will go back to Croatia, whether it's now or whether he still feels he's got one more sort of spell in Italy. Potentially, he's on big wages, and if he wants to stay on those kind of wages, I think that would probably be tricky. Certainly in Croatia and even in Italy, really. But I think that's where I'd expect him to go. Reguilon, there'll be clubs in Spain who'd be interested in taking him for the rest of the season. But it is a weird one because they are suddenly, they thought they'd resolve some of these issues in the summer, and now they're just back on their kind of to-do list. And it's not easy. And yeah, Tanganga's another one they'll be disappointed because he like Ollie Skip, they were probably in comparable situations. Tanganga playing a bit, but not loads. And he just needed that game time. And he's not got it. He's had injuries. But yeah, they'll really want that to work out in the second half of the season. Again, looking ahead to the summer, when you think about, is it time for Tanganga to move on?
And Dembele as well. I mean, I've just totally forgot about him. Chat fair play. Jack has just mentioned him, and Dembele's due to come back. I mean, there was big rumours, wasn't there, that the Galatasaray didn't want him anymore and they wanted to terminate his loan. We haven't heard anything on that.
No, I think that was a little bit overplayed. I think as well because some of it was slightly lost in translation. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's not been massively impressive, and I think a lot of the fans turned on him pretty quickly. But yeah, I don't think it was as close in the first half of the season to getting to that point as was made out.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose the other one, he splits opinion as in Brian Hill, because he's, you mentioned him earlier about, not working out brilliantly against the Man City game and had to be dragged off essentially at half time. But he's had a couple of cameos, I think, at the back end of last season. I remember that. I think it's one pass in the Crystal Palace when we smashed them 4-0.
Yeah.
Other than that, he's again in and out through injury. Is he too slight to play in the Premier League? Then I always think of Modric. I always think of that classic Arsene Wenger quote, we didn't go for Modric because he's too slight. Then he rocks up at Spurs, absolutely brilliant, and then wins the Ballon d'Or with Real Madrid and about 5 Champions Leagues. Love that. Is Brian Hill being kind of typecast in there, or is there a player in there, or is it again a chance for him to go out on loan? Because we've waxed lyrical about Perisic, I think, on all the channels that and I read all your stuff as well, Charlie. And he's in the main, Perisic has done some really good stuff for Spurs. But that deal, if Brian Hill has to go out again on loan, is that deal being a bit of a flop?
Yeah, I think that's one of the few on Paratici's record that hasn't really worked out. Yeah, I know. The thing with Modric was he had these enormous calves, and so he was stronger than he kind of
Jack
looked.
Grealish calves.
Exactly. Yeah, he was a strong boy despite looking so slight. Hill, I just think he maybe isn't physical enough for the Premier League, and that happens from time to time, and it feels kind of antiquated to be saying that, given how much football's changed, but it is still a concern. So yeah, I mean, I've just had a message actually saying Galini, and that was the other one I was thinking of, but he was alone.
Oh, God, yeah,
he doesn't really count.
I just think there were Galini, Nuno, and obviously Hill. I mean, there's not too many you can say you can level against Prattity. There's a few in there.
The Holy Trinity.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like that. The Holy Trinity, I tell you.
But yeah, I think Hill. I've sort of I've always wanted that to work out. That Galini shouts from Alistair Gold, by the way. He wants credit for that.
I'll bet he does.
He's in my ear watching.
Go on, Ali.
Go on, Ali.
It's like having an earpiece in. In fact, every good point I've made here has come from him. He's just been saying, like, say this. Say that.
Are you telling me Ali's on the VAR in your ear?
Yeah, exactly.
He's on the VAR.
There's always someone in Stockley Park. Believe me, even the games aren't on. So do you think, Charlie, potentially we could see Hill go out on loan or on a perm between now and the end of the window?
Yeah. I wouldn't rule that out. I mean, I think the Fiorentina one's been a bit overstated. I don't think that's necessarily that far along, but Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he went out, if there's someone interested.
Okay. I know we're really being cheeky. Charlie, we're going to take 2 minutes of your time. Lee, we'll go over to you for the penultimate question. These are always the favourite questions that come at the end. The interrogation is over. It is. Lee, the favourite questions. First one over to you and I'll look to close.
So you want me to do my question though, right, Rick? Right.
That's right. Yeah, your question.
Yeah, perfect. How many, Charlie, do you think? No. So how many players do you think we're not worried about quality? This is how we know.
I think Enoch are cutting the feed here on us here for this question. Isn't it the right way? Right at the end there, we're losing Lee. We might lose Lee. We're back. Go on, Macca.
Yeah, sorry. So what I was just saying, we're not worried about quality. We just want quantity. We're baying for transfer blood. So how many transfers are we gonna? This is what Rick does all of January. So serious question though, how many do you think we're getting, Charlie? How many do you think we're getting across the line?
Talking just like senior players, so excluding if there's a kind of left field younger player comes in. Yeah. I mean, definitely 2, and then it's tricky. Either 2 or 3. Say 2.5. I'll go with 2, just because I think the third there might be too many moving parts for it to happen, and they might. That's the midfielder, sort of.
Yeah, I was going to say that third is the whole Højbjerg midfield conversation.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot going on there.
I can't see Højbjerg leaving until deadline day. I think that's going to be that. Hopefully, we get in Drăgușin and we get in Werner, and then it's going to be a long wait. So you Spurs fans are thinking that we've done early business and then going to go again next week and the week after, just setting your expectations. I think it'd then be a Højbjerg on the last day of the season scenario with somebody coming in. What do you think?
You never told me that, Lee. You never told me that, Lee, off air. Oh, don't do it to me, boy. Don't do it to me, boy. Right, final question for Charlie, and the interrogation is over. We've kept this man longer than what we planned. We apologise in advance, Charlie. You know what these shows are like. We've got talkers on it. It always gets too much. Look, I think the real question is now is, what do you feel for you constitutes success for Spurs under Ange Postecoglou? What do you feel is a successful season?
That's a tricky one, and it's certainly changed from when I was asked that question at the start of the season. I think let's be bold and say Champions League qualification. If they do that, that will definitely be a success. If they don't get it, I don't think that means it's a failure as such. But I think now, given where we are, Spurs 1 point off the top 4, just over halfway through the season, having done that with a lot of players missing, I think if they can get players back, then why can't they aim and expect to be in that top 4? I think it's on for them.
Charlie, we hold the optimism light with you on View from the Lane. Don't let us down. We're listening and we're tuning in to make sure. Mate, where can everybody find the wonderful work you do for us over in the Spurs community that hold your words with such high esteem, and we hang on to every one of those words?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the podcast, and then all my written stuff is for The Athletic, and I tend to tweet links to pretty much all my articles. So follow me on Twitter, and I'll link to all my podcasts there. So yeah, that's kind of the central hub.
Amazing. Mate, thank you so much. Sorry to take you over time. Really apologise, but it has been a tremendous show. Lee, thank you so much, my man. We're just getting started, right, Macca? Just getting started.
Mate. Couple of signings in. You'll get one every day, Rick. You will be loving it.
Come on.
We've got people now here. Charlie's getting information all for, that's another one in. It'd be like horse racing commentary, Rick.
Listen, let's hope so. As long as they're quality over quality, we'll see. This is from the wonderful Lee McQueen, from the brilliant Charlie Eccleshare. We've been the last one on Spurs. We'll be back before you know it. Thank you so much for all your tremendous support. Keep safe, keep well. It is the January transfer window. We enjoy it. We love it. Thank you so much. Come on, you